Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar with This Can Happen. I'm Mandy and I'm your facilitator for today's session. We're just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Joe, who will speak for around 45-50 minutes, and we'll take questions at the end. We do encourage you to interact, so please do put your questions in the question and answer box, and we'll read them out anonymously at the end. We'll do as many as we can, depending on the time that we've got left. Just to let you know, the session is recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording in the next 24 hours. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Joe.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And I should also mention that you will also, if you like, receive a copy of all the slides today. And the lovely thing about today's slides is they're interactive. So you have an opportunity, if you'd like to contribute to the whole presentation. To do that, you need to go to www.menti.com, either on another device or on another page on your computer. And when you get there, you'll be invited to put in a code. Don't worry if you're not catching up with this, it's in the chat as well. The code that you need to enter is 76081907. That's 76081907. So www.menti.com and then input that code, which is in the chat, and you will see these slides. And then at various points during the presentation, you'll be invited to contribute. And just let me completely reassure you that every contribution is anonymous. I've not actually used Menti Meter with more than 300 people before, so I'm not quite sure what will happen if we get, more than that trying to contribute all at once. I'm sure the software will cope. But anyway, I'd just like to start by thanking This Can Happen very, very much for the invitation to present this webinar. Some of you may know that we were fortunate enough to win the Mental Health Consultancy Award at last year's awards, about which we were obviously absolutely delighted. And I've got this opportunity to present this short webinar to you, which reflects a very small aspect of our work at Petros. So I'm going to talk to you about energy and how to manage it. And I came to this whole concept probably about 20 years ago when I was working as a forensic psychologist in the prison service. There probably isn't much of a tougher environment, I don't think, than secure settings with high-risk offenders in them to make you think about how to thrive and how to survive. And although there are many aspects to that, managing energy is one of the key ones. So the work that I'm going to talk to you about actually comes from two sports psychologists called Jim Lur and Tony Schwartz, who started off looking at how to differentiate between athletes who are all equally skilled, but some who are going to go on to become world class and others not. And what they found, in fact, was that it was how those athletes managed their energy in their downtime that differentiated world-class performance from everything else. They took all their learning from sports psychology and applied it to corporate performance, and they've got loads of work published. They've got a very interesting book called On Form, which is referenced at the end of this presentation for you if you want to look into this further. But I really can't recommend their work highly enough. I don't know them, I've never met them, but promote what they do as much as I can because it makes so much sense. And the other thing about energy management that I'm going to talk to you about is it's actually very, very simple. But we live in a really complex world, and never more complex than it is at the moment. And sometimes a return to those simple strategies is really what we need. And it's not unusual for me to be given some feedback in this presentation which says, well, surely this is just common sense. And I say, well, actually it is. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. But a very wise guru once said to me, not much sense is actually common. So I'm probably not going to teach you much you don't already know, but I really, really hope that it's a reminder to return to those really basic steps that help us thrive in a very, very challenging world. So let me start by just introducing Lur and Schwartz's mantra, which I really love and is a really good reminder for all of us. And that is that managing energy, not time, is the key to high performance, health and happiness. The thing about time is that it does its own thing. It ticks inexorably on, doesn't it, time? The seconds tick by, the minutes, the hours, the days, and half the time, I don't know about you, but I don't know where the time has gone during the day. And we can't control it, it just happens. What we can influence really effectively is the quality and quantity of the energy we have to make the best use of time. So to thrive, we need to keep our energy tanks full and full with the right fuel. And that's what we're going to address in this workshop. And what you might be surprised to hear is we don't just have one energy tank. Lohr and Schwartz very kindly divide it into 4 different tanks for us, and this makes it much, much more manageable. The most fundamental of those is our physical energy. So we measure this in terms of quantity. So whether our tank is empty or full or kind of halfway. The quality of our energy is related to our emotional energy. This is the key to our regulation, whether or not we can hold it together in the pressures of the daily living or whether or not we lose it. We measure that in terms of quality, so positive or negative. The way we focus our energy is about our mental state, our cognitive state. So our mental energy is what sustains our focus day to day, and it enables us to be mentally agile. Now, what's really interesting in my world of work as a professor of sort of resilience, really, I suppose, of professor of psychology, is that resilience isn't about strength. It isn't about just being able to take on more and more and more. It's about knowing how to respond adaptively and flexibly to the demands and the challenges that you're under. And sometimes that actually means stopping. So our mental energy is really important to help our resilience and to keep us focused on what's important. But the force of our energy comes from our spiritual tank. And you may think about that in religious terms, or faith terms, but actually really what Lohr and Schwartz are referring to is our core beliefs, our values, what really drives us and really motivates us. And I know in my work as a consultant and doing individual coaching work with people, it's often when they come through the door saying they are to the bone tired, it's, you know, a good night's sleep or a good meal is not going to sort this out. That actually where they're most depleted in this spiritual area, that they're not living by their core values. So, and some of this, as you hear this, you might feel, you can feel it applying to you. So what we're going to do is just look at those 4 domains in brief detail, with me confident in the knowledge that you can look into this further yourself if you'd like to. And I hope this is just the start of a journey for you. I would say that this framework for me is part of day-to-day living. And I really, really hope that you can take this on as well, because it really can support in thriving in a complex world. So as we get started, let's have a test of Menti Meter. So hopefully if you've got into menti.com and you've input this code, you'll see this slide that gives you an opportunity to think about which of your tanks most needs topping up right now. Would it be your physical tank, your emotional tank, your mental tank, or your spiritual tank? Now, oh, good, it's working. Brilliant. If you haven't come across Menti Meter before, this was our absolute salvation during the pandemic, where we managed to get all our training online and to use this interactive training software to make it much more interesting than just listening to me chatting or one of my colleagues. So I'm thrilled that it's working, and you can see how it's working. And all we can tell is in the bottom right-hand corner, it lets you know how many people have made a contribution. And it's looking pretty even Stevens at the moment between emotional and mental tank. Interesting, because I might have predicted that people's spiritual energy was at its lowest ebb at the moment. But so we've got 116 to 125, 128 contributions. I don't know how many people are on the call. I probably can't wait for everybody, otherwise it would take too long, but you can get a real gist. So I want you just to think about this as you go through the training. Think about which of your tanks is emptiest, and at the end we'll have a look at some tips we might have for taking some immediate steps to renew that level of energy. So this is fabulous. We've got loads of contributions. It looks like people are kind of a bit cognitively tired mostly, and maybe emotionally tired as well. Okay, forgive me for those of you who haven't managed to make the contribution yet, but I'll move on. Let's have a look at physical energy. So as Lohr and Schwartz say, this is the most fundamental source of fuel. Without it, we really can't do anything else. And they say that when you think about a battery, When you think about your phone or think about your laptop and think about how you feel when that battery starts getting a bit low, that the first thing we think of doing is plugging it in, isn't it? We wouldn't wait and think, oh, well, it doesn't matter if it runs out and collapses, because it would feel like a whole world would fall apart. Now, we actually need to treat ourselves the same way. If we can feel our energy depleting, we need to take some pretty quick steps in our physical domain to get ourselves plugged back in again. So let's have a look at how we do this. Lowe and Schwartz say that the three most important regulators of our physical energy are sleeping, eating and breathing. And you're probably going, oh, duh, of course. But it's fascinating, isn't it? In a world where we are on 24/7, actually, these are often the first things that go, and we tend not to take any notice of it. So let's just have a quick look at each of these very briefly, a couple of examples. Let's look at sleeping. I suspect everybody on this call is familiar with the advice that you should get between 7 to 8 hours sleep a night on average. That seems to be what suits most people. What's really interesting is when you ask people if they know why 7 to 8 hours is the recommended amount. And actually, very often we don't. We hear this advice and go, all right, I must get 7 to 8 hours sleep, and we don't know why. So let me explain to you how important this is to our overall well-being, our overall stamina. What I've got here is a screenshot from a sleep app this one's called Sleep Cycle. I actually use a Withings watch nowadays. But this very usefully gives you a graph of your sleep pattern. And as you can see, it's a particularly long night's sleep. I personally do better on 8 to 9 hours. Some people can do 4 to 5, 5 to 6 hours, and that's fine. What's important, though, is what happens within those hours. And I want to draw your attention to these dips down here at the bottom of the graph, because what these represent here is deep sleep. And whilst all stages of our sleep are really crucial, I just want to focus on deep sleep, because in deep sleep, we have very, very little brain activity. In fact, if we were wired up to an electroencephalograph, we would just see delta waves that would indicate the vital organs are functioning. We haven't, in fact, died. But there is very little other demand on the body. So we're very, very still in deep sleep. And what this allows is for the body to repair the damage of the day. And we know from sleep studies that if we take blood from people throughout the sleep cycle, in deep sleep, we produce about 6 times more protein. And the job of that protein is to help repair the damage. What's really interesting is in our modern world, where we're constantly stressed and overwhelmed and there's so much pressure on us, that we don't sleep well, and the thing that generally suffers in our sleep cycle are phases of deep sleep. There is so much I could say about it, but I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to refer you to some really, really helpful books. So if you are one of those people who is struggling with your sleep, maybe you're finding it hard to fall asleep, or you're sleeping very shallowly, or you wake up many, many times during the night, or you wake up at 2 in the morning, can't get back to sleep. Any book by Narina Ramlakhan, who is a colleague of mine, I think is really worthwhile. There are, of course, other books available. I've read Fast Asleep, Wide Awake and The Little Book of Sleep, both full of really practical tips and techniques for helping you get some really good sleep hygiene and get your sleep right. Because fundamentally, if that's wrong, it's very, very hard to address everything else. I haven't actually read Tired But Wired, but I just love the title. I think everybody can relate to that particular title. So in terms of our physical energy, getting our sleep right is really crucial. Actually, fundamentally, at the bottom of getting a really good night's sleep is being able to switch off your mind, and these books will help with supporting that. Let's move on to food. So I'm not going to give you any lecture at all on healthy diets. Everybody knows what a good diet looks like, I'm sure. Whether or not we all follow that is a completely different matter. Sometimes we're on the go so much, fast food, you know, we wake ourselves off with coffee, we send ourselves off to sleep with sleeping pills, and in between we stuff a whole load of toxins into our bodies, a little bit like putting unleaded fuel into a diesel tank. It's really not very sensible. But still, that's how we live. So we need to come back to these very basic things. So I'll just remind you of that. It's up to you entirely what you do about it. But I do have a friend who's a professor of nutrition. And when I was first looking at doing presentations on managing energy, I asked her if she had any hints or tips for some food that you could eat that would just really give you a quick physical energy boost. And her advice was chocolate covered Brazil nuts, preferably plain chocolate because it's slightly better for you. And she recommends 3 a day, chocolate covered Brazil nuts. I'm not going to go through all the reasons why they're so marvellous and such a superfood. You'll get all this on your slide, but they help with immune function. They're full of the really good fatty acids. They've got useful antioxidants in them, and chocolate makes you feel good. So there's an absolute prescription for being able to eat chocolate, but with chocolate covered Brazil nuts. Okay, so diet, it really is just see it as fuel and we need to try and fuel our bodies with the right fuel for the work that we're requiring our bodies to do. And then breathing. So breathing is regulated by our brainstem. It happens until we die, and we absolutely take it for granted until we can't do it. And then we begin to realize either if we choke on something, or we've got shortness of breath, or if we're feeling really stressed and anxious and panicky, when our sympathetic nervous system takes over and everything begins to feel overwhelming. And then we realize how important our breathing is. Now, if we had time, I would do a breathing exercise with you, but in the interest of time, I just encourage you to have a look at probably anything around mindfulness. The Calm app, the Headspace app will all help with ways of keeping your breathing slow and rhythmic and deep. And hopefully you're in a space where you might even just be able to practice this. Now, what I would say is try and avoid apps and guidance that count for you, because we've all got different sized lungs. So breathing to somebody else's count isn't always that helpful. So just breathe in to the point where you don't feel you can anymore, and breathe out until you feel you've got all the air out to whatever your count is. And sometimes you're encouraged to have a bit of a gap in between. So you breathe in and you hold and then you breathe out. Why is this important? Well, there are some costs to not breathing well. And do you know what we always say to people, don't we, when we're in the panic? We say, breathe, just breathe, because we know instinctively how important it is to our well-being. And these are the costs of not breathing properly, or at least not taking some time. Anyone who does yoga will probably know from their yoga teacher that we have about 3 weeks worth of stale air in the bottom of our lungs, because we so rarely inhale fully and exhale fully. When we do, this is the benefit. Okay, so many advantages to just taking the time. Here's me taking a deep breath, probably not very healthily actually, because I'm speaking and I'm talking fast and I've got a lot to get through, and I can feel my chest tighten as I do that. So a lovely big inhale through the nose and a nice clean exhale, and it just brings everything back to a lovely baseline and increase those feelings of calmness and relaxation. So I really hope you're practicing as I speak. Okay, that's a rapid tour through physical energy and just some real basics, but here are some suggestions, and in a minute I'm going to ask you for yours via Menti Meter. So I hope you'll start thinking about things that you do to boost your physical energy during the day. There was a question in one of the questions about, how to get your energy up in the morning. And Narina Ramlakhan recommends almonds and dates, particularly for those of you who struggle to eat breakfast. I know for me, I often don't feel hungry when I wake up, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to replenish your blood glucose levels, because you've got to think about what breakfast means. It means breaking your fast. So there's a strong chance you haven't been eating for 16 odd hours. So you are going to need something to replenish that energy. And caffeine, sadly, isn't really the answer. I mean, it'll give you a quick boost, but then you're going to come crashing down again. So it sounds utterly ridiculous to be talking to adults about eating breakfast, but I'm going to do it anyway. And the recommendation, as I say, if you don't feel like a good healthy breakfast, then almonds and dates. For some reason, she says I think it's like 2 dates and 7 almonds. I don't know quite why she's so precise. I'll need to go back to the book. But there's some suggestions. Lower and Schwartz recommend eating strategically. Now, of all the recommendations I'm going to give you today, this is the one that I haven't actually personally tried, just because of the amount of organisation it would take for me. But you can see, can't you, for athletes particularly, eating 5 to 6 low-calorie, nutritious meals means that you're probably going to be physically energized through most of the day. I have met somebody, not an athlete, who's done this and has said it's absolute magic. So I recommend it, even though I haven't tried it myself. And if you can do that, you might find that it just keeps your energy flow up during the day. And then water. Of course, we all know, again, that we're recommended to drink, I can't remember how much it is it like 2 litres of water a day, 8 pints? In physical terms, when we start getting dehydrated, we lose strength and speed. And that also has a cognitive effect on us as well, because it compromises concentration, it compromises coordination. So if you're somebody whose work requires a lot of brain work, it's going to be even equally important to make sure that you stay hydrated. I think we've got billions of cells and they're all 85% or more water. So it makes you think about how important it is. I think about seeing my plants wilting when I forget to water them, and I always feel really, really bad about it. And then you water them and they spring back to life so quickly. And the same must be the same said for our cells, that we need to keep them hydrated. So think of wilting plants and think of wilting cells and drink something. It's really important. And then Lower and Schwartz say recovery breaks every hour and a half to 2 hours are really, really essential to sustain performance. And I'm going to touch on this again in mental energy. Well, I'll touch on it now, actually. We tend to live in a culture where we think stopping and taking a break is going to be seen as lazy or shirking or not being productive. So I want to tell you something about taking breaks. The research into human performance is so robust that it's actually written into law. What the research tells us is that when we start a task, we can sustain our attention and manage things pretty well initially. But as time passes, our performance drops. And at about an hour and a half, at about 90 minutes, it kind of like falls off the cliff. And this research has been replicated so strongly so many times that it's written into air traffic controllers' contracts and law that they can only sit at their consoles for about an hour and a half to 2 hours at a time. And then they must take a break. Because if they lose concentration, the result is catastrophic, isn't it? They miss a blip on the screen, or they miss a plane on the runway, or they miss one coming in because they've been sat there for 3 hours trying to focus, and it would be disaster. And I'm still a bit baffled to why we don't treat ourselves the same way, why we think that we can sit at our desks for hours on end and think that we're performing to any great standard. We're really not. And in an organisation where taking breaks is shirked at, or we're not stopping for 10 minutes to take a walk around the block or get some water from the water cooler or have a chat with a friend or do a puzzle on your phone or something, those are cultures where productivity is going to be higher than in cultures where we think we have to keep going, because simply speaking, we can't. And it will likely end in disaster. So I'll stop preaching about that, but I just feel so passionately about it that people think they have to keep going when it's actually the craziest thing to do. So every hour and a half or so, take a break. And of course, don't forget to breathe. So what would be really nice, hopefully you've been thinking about these things. I've actually turned my phone onto airplane mode, so I can't contribute to this because I don't want to get a phone call in the middle. But let's have a look at some of your suggestions. And if I had one, I'd say take a power nap. 20 minutes, don't fall into deep sleep because that'll screw up your sleep cycles. But a 20-minute power nap midday, absolutely brilliant for renewing physical energy. And obviously I'm going to say eat chocolate covered Brazil nuts. Oh, mint oil, that's an interesting one. I've not heard that, but I'm sure that's good. And air, fresh air, nature, absolutely brilliant. I'm glad someone else likes power naps. Supplements, absolutely brilliant. And if you're a person of a certain age like me, the ones that stop your joints aching are really helpful for physical energy, because then you feel you can get up and do something. Lots of walking, napping, dancing. I came across a club called Body Groove over the lockdown, this woman who encourages you to dance. And there's a lovely book called Move by Caroline somebody, which talks about the importance of movement for everything. And in her book, she says that since the year 2000, IQ points of human beings have been dropping because we've become so sedentary. And one of the reasons it's postulated that we became the more intelligent species is once we needed to start moving for hunting and gathering and claiming our land. So the fact that we've become more sedentary appears to be impacting on our intelligence. So movement is going to be really important for everything. I saw bananas on there. Lovely. Taking the dog out, quick dance, stretching. Do have a stretch while you're sat at your seat. It will feel really, really nice. It's absolutely lovely. Oh, and give your eyes a break. Yes, there's a 20-20-20 tip. Every 20 minutes, look away for 20 seconds and focus on something 20 meters away. Never more important since we've been working so much at home. So I'm just going to do that myself, actually, because that's a really helpful reminder. Thank you. So definitely give your eyes a break. Okay, we've got loads of hints and tips on there, and you'll get all these and you can just pick the ones that work for you. And you know, I also recommend is stick them around the place so you remember and not forget to stretch and breathe and do some yoga poses and dance around the kitchen and sing a bit. That would be nice, and get some sunlight. Okay, lovely. We've got 155, 157 contributions there. It's fabulous. Right, let's have a look at emotional energy. So there were some questions as I flicked through them before the session about the toll of feeling unhappy or miserable or stressed, and Laura and Schwartz are all over it. So what they've done very helpfully is divide energy into 4 domains. The first domain they describe is high negative energies. It's basically just feeling really stressed, fearful, anxious, defensive, resentful. Or low negative energy, just feeling depressed, exhausted, burnt out, fatigued. The thing about these emotional states is it's like being plugged into the mains and the current being reversed. It just sucks you dry of any joy in life. Now, I could do a whole session on emotion and what they're for and how important they are. And even these negative emotions, let me just simply say they're a signal that something isn't right. You would attend to the signal, let the emotion go, and try and resolve the underlying problem. Very simply would be the way of dealing with it. It's not always easy, I accept that, because what we'd really prefer to feel is low, when you're on our downtime, this sort of low positive energy, or when we're performing, you know, when, like now for me and for you in your work, that you're invigorated and confident and challenged and joyful, and that's how that feels. And I think organisationally, most organisations, if they've got any sense, want most of their employees in these 2 boxes most of the time, because this is where we perform at our best. The negative emotions, they're part of being human. Learning how to manage them and deal with them is really important. It's not what this session is about, but we want to try and manage our energy to stay in these positive domains as much of the time as possible. So let's have a think about how this works. It's really important to take time out to do things you enjoy that are challenging, adventurous, because these are the things that are key to our well-being and performance. Now, if you're really lucky, you get this stuff at work as well. Not everybody does, but if you're not getting that at work, it's going to be even more critical that you find things outside of your working life that do this for you, that provide that kind of challenge and adventure. Because the thing we know about negative emotions is if we hold them, if we hang on to them, they are really, really toxic. I could talk to you for hours about the research of anxiety, rumination and depression on the cardiovascular system. We know the impact it has on our sleep and therefore our immunity and so on. So we need to learn to manage those. Get in touch if you'd like to know more. Our positive emotional energy is fueled by things like feeling confident, feeling effective, experiencing empathy, and finding ways that we can do that either, as I say, through our working lives or at home. It's not as easy to feel self-confident, is it? I hear a lot of chatter, particularly on LinkedIn, for example, about imposter syndrome. And I'm like, if you're there, you're not an imposter. So, and fake it till you make it. All sorts of techniques we can use to have that sense of confidence and self-control. So I want you to think about things that you might do that make you feel good. And they're not mutually exclusive, by the way, like restoring physical energy and emotional energy. So being out in nature, walking your dog, whilst renewing your physical energy, might also really help with your emotional energy. But here are some suggestions from the experts. So changing the channel, not getting stuck in one way of thinking, and making sure you find time to do things that are emotionally nourishing for you. And these relate to the ones that follow. So this idea of waking up, it's about, we talk about waking up, don't we? We talk about getting wake-up calls, but they're usually really, really dramatic. You know, something big happens and it really woke me up to what's important. We don't have to wait for anything big to happen. We can simply wake up now. So here's a little thing for you to try, because this is recognizing the difference between absent-mindedness and presence of mind. When our minds are absent, they tend to go off and make up their own stories. Now, that's fine if it's a love story or a comedy, or, you know, reviewing lovely things that have happened in the past or fantasizing about a lovely future. But what happens when those idle daydreams turn into waking nightmares? What happens when actually it's like malicious gossip in your head? And that's the negative emotion that can be so absolutely draining. So what we need to do is, as much of the time as we can, is keep our minds present by focusing on the next point, which is what's important now. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to just ask you to really focus on the presentation. Notice when your mind wanders off, because it almost certainly will. But a way to focus on what's important now is to come to your senses. And I mean, literally to connect probably with your sense of listening. We've got 5 of them, but listening's the easiest sense to connect with. And if you can hear what's being said now and your full attention is given to this, which presumably is what's important now because you've chosen to be here, what you hopefully will find is all the other nasty stuff just dissolves away a little bit, and hopefully completely. That would be really, really nice. So waking up means having your mind present, focusing your attention on what's important now by coming to your senses. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, if you've been able to do that, you should be feeling a little bit more chilled emotionally, especially if you've got loads of other stuff going on that keeps nagging at your attention. Keep it here. And another thing that can really help with this is nurturing our social network, because we are social animals and we need people. One of my massive frustrations through the lockdown was the messaging about social distancing, because actually social distancing wasn't really what we were doing. What we needed to do was physically distance. More than ever, we needed to stay socially connected, more than ever during that 2 years. And you know, I know from my own experience of my mum, who's been socially isolating for 2 years, the toll that has taken on her well-being has been horrendous, despite all our efforts otherwise. She never has had COVID itself, but the cost has been really high. So we need our social network. We need it more than ever. And it's key to our emotional well-being. We all need that person we can talk to. And somebody asked me recently, why talking works. Why does talking work? And because generally, provided we don't go over and over and over and over stuff, but talking about things soothes our amygdala. So it just keeps our sort of levels of arousal down. That's why talking works. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but put simply. So any other suggestions from you for renewing our emotional energy? So you've got chatting with friends and things like that. I could want to reach for my phone and input things, but I can't. So yeah, I love reading. I'm reading a very good book at the moment called The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. It's really, really funny, and does remind me of my mum, which is probably why I'm enjoying it so much as well. Meditation, laughing, definitely. Journaling, a little bit like talking. There's a whole field of psychology, and particularly in therapeutic psychology, called written disclosure or trauma disclosure. And it's recognised that writing about our emotional well-being, or not, depending on how we're feeling, has massive impacts on our psychological well-being. So writing emotionally about what's happening to us. If anyone's interested, I've got a little sort of A4 sheet. It's like a prescription. Please do feel free to email jo@petros.org.uk. So it's jo@petros.org.uk, and say, just put written disclosure in the subject line, and I will just send it to you return. And it's particularly good if you're somebody who doesn't like letting other people know how you feel, which is the case for lots of people. We don't like talking about our inner deepest secrets because we feel that we might get judged or that someone will think differently of us. So writing can be a fabulous way of resolving problems and getting things out, letting go of things. I love these. So yeah, new hobbies, creativity. I've got a colleague and dear friend who is a play therapist, and we stop playing, don't we, when we're adults? And she is constantly encouraging everybody to play. So the last time I went to a museum with my daughter and we were in the ballroom, we waltzed around the ballroom. There was no one else in there, and we didn't get thrown out by security, but oh boy, was it fun. It was such fun and a great renewal of physical energy. And my daughter, by the way, is an adult. She's not a child. So anyway, lovely. Putting things on, girls' weekend, hugs, yeah, physical contact is lovely. Accepting how you're feeling. I think that's so valuable. I remember once my daughter said to me, she's about 12, and she said, "Mum, it's your job to make me happy." And I was clearly in a good moment and said, "Actually, love, it isn't my job to make you happy. My job is to help you cope when you're not." And that includes just being with the feelings that you've got and knowing it's part of being human. So yes, I love that. A bath, gardening, lovely. So we've got loads of contributions. Let's move on to the last two domains, and then we'll see if there are any questions. So let's have a look at mental energy. I love this yoga pose. Yoga comes up a lot in energy management, but you can't do that kind of pose without having a really strong mental focus. So I can't do it because I'm not flexible enough, but it's lovely. So mental capacity is what we use to focus. It's interesting in mindfulness, and people say, well, what is your mind full of? Actually, your mind is full of attention. Your power is what you give your attention to. Do you give it to the chatter in your head, which often is not very nice and a bit like malicious gossip, or do you give your attention to what's important now, which helps you with that clarity and that focus? What helps with our mental energy are things like preparation, visualization, self-talk, time management, creativity. I smiled at myself, and I was yesterday going through this presentation, visualizing giving the presentation, and I thought it's amazing how much you practice these skills actually without even recognizing that you're doing it. Didn't mean I wasn't nervous, and actually I could feel at the start of this, I could feel my heart beating, but thought, no, it's all right because I've prepared. You know, I've thought about what I want to do. I'm not coming at this completely unprepared, and it really helps with that mental focus. We've already, a lot of things have come up around physical exercise. There's been some extraordinary research actually done with dementia patients and residents in old people's homes, where the patients who've been able to have been encouraged to get up and exercise, maybe just to walk around the grounds of the home or to get involved in little exercise classes for elderly people. And what's been found is that residents who exercise show a reduction in their dementia symptoms. And I'm guessing it's partly about getting oxygen to the brain, but there's no doubt that, you know, if you even just going out for a brisk walk around the block every hour and a half or something like that can really, really help with your mental focus. If you're working on a really challenging mental task or task that requires a lot of mental energy, like air traffic control or planning something or doing accounts or working on spreadsheets, it's even more important that you take those regular breaks to restore and renew that mental energy. And then some suggestions from the experts, and where it goes back to this controlling attention. You decide what you give your attention to. Our attention is powerful. It can hijack ourselves. We hijack ourselves all the time. To learn to manage your attention and to focus your attention is a little bit like building a muscle. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Meditation is fantastic for building that skill. But even just coming to your senses, what's important now, giving that focus to what you're doing, and do that regularly, and you'll find it becomes much easier, particularly if you have loads of things on, like loads of emotional things that are vying for your attention. That ability to just focus on one thing at a time can be really, really powerful in sustaining our energy. The other thing about regular breaks, and I found this fascinating when I found this out, is that our brain only weighs a tiny % of our body weight. There's no fat on there, but it uses a quarter of the oxygen that we need, which is extraordinary. So of course we need to take breaks. We need to recover. And in our times of recovery and consolidation, that's when we're filing things away, putting things in our head. You know, we think about where you are when you get your best ideas. It is rarely trying to force it through your brain. So breaks are really important. And then in the resilience literature, optimism is coming up a lot as very helpful for our mental energy. It's not about being all Pollyanna, but it is about recognizing the balance, I think, between, you know, things that have gone well and why they've gone well. And it does seem that optimistic people are more persistent with what they do. This actually really helps with sleep as well. So a very quick sleep tip, going back to the beginning. This is one from Narina Ramlakan. She said, as you're falling asleep at night and you lie down and your head hits the pillow, just run through the things that you're thankful for that have gone well today. There could be tiny things. The fact it didn't rain while you were walking the dog, or depending on who you are, the fact it did rain when you were walking the dog. You know, that you're on time for something, that the kids got their homework done or whatever. Try and just run through those things that have gone well. And what you'll find it does is help your brain release oxytocin, which is the trust neurotransmitter. When we're fretting and we're ruminating, we're producing adrenaline, which of course means the body is not going to sleep. So to do things that produce things like oxytocin, maybe the endorphins, so thinking those thoughts can really, really help with sleep as well, and hopefully help you be more persistent and successful. So I wonder if any of you have got any other suggestions for renewing your mental energy. One of my favourites, bizarrely, is doing little puzzles, like word puzzles and things. And I'll often find when I stop every hour and a half or so, I'll just get on my phone and do it. Is it Sudoku? I never pronounce it right. But I love it. It's a really good other focus for my brain. It means I can let everything else go. So let's see if anyone else has got any suggestions for renewing. Oh, asking for help. Good. I'm so glad someone put that, because we tend not to, don't we? But actually, do you know how nice it feels when somebody asks you for help? Makes you feel good on the whole, unless you're like really overwhelmed with other stuff and you haven't got time. But yeah, learning a new language. I took up singing a while ago, and I had to learn a little bit of music. Well, I don't do it anymore, but actually found it really good for sort of mental expansion. Like learning music was like learning a new language. It was extraordinary. I wish I'd done it more. I don't know what Blockadoku is, but it looks hard. I'll give it a go. And I can't do Wordle. I don't know how you do it. It just completely baffles me. How do you choose one 5-letter word out of the millions there are in the world? Anyway, maybe someone can enlighten me. Yeah, positive affirmations, talking, reading quietly, riding your motorbike. And I get that, because I'm guessing you have to I know you have to really, really focus when you're on your bike. So there's not really any room for anything else. So I could totally get that. Go out in the cold. Yes, good plan. Again, meditation. Okay. Cuddles. So you can see, there's a lot of crossover here, and it's interesting how little we actually think consciously about doing these things and how valuable they are to restoring our energy. I've seen the time. We've got one more bit to go through in a case study, so I'm just going to move on. I hope that's okay, but we've got lots and lots of examples on there. Let's go to our last one, which is our spiritual energy. This is about what's really important to you as a person and living by your core values. So it's what drives us, it's what motivates us, it's what ensures we're committed to what we do. And although we often, as human beings, we share some really core values, we also have some that are very specific to us, and they're often beyond our sense of self-interest. So it's the way we expend our spiritual energy is likely to be very connected to the way we renew it. So one of the things I've done in my life is fostering. It's really, really important to me. It takes an enormous amount of energy to do that, but you get so much back from it. So there's so much intertwined. And that goes on to say it can be really demanding but renewing at the same time. And it's really important that we balance our sense of purpose beyond ourselves with adequately looking after ourselves and being kind to ourselves, being kind to our own minds. I could tell you a little story actually very quickly. I'll do it in the context of this. So we need to really regularly reflect on what's important to us and identify that. And sometimes we don't know. So, you know, when people walk through the door at a coaching appointment and go, I just am to the bone tired, we might talk through what's gone on over the last year, and we might talk about what's really important to them, and then look at how do you marry those two things up. And we find that people have not been living by their core values because life has kind of got in the way. And sometimes it takes a bit of courage. So the story I was going to tell you is actually a prison officer who worked in a segregation unit, and he'd worked in segregation units all his career. They're the units where the naughtiest of the naughty offenders go. They're harsh environments. They're very disciplined, very authoritarian. And that was him. He was very good at the discipline, at the boundaries, at the black and white. I could never work in a segregation unit. I'm far too fluffy. And it worked. And the prisoners there liked him. They knew where they were with him. It felt safe. And one day, after a massive review by the prison's ombudsman, there was a suggestion that segregation units should become more therapeutic. And I was in the meeting with this officer who, at this announcement, grabbed my arm quite hard, I hasten to add, and said, if this happens, I've got to leave. I cannot stay in an environment like that. That's not who I am. And it was an actual live demonstration of someone's core values being really threatened. As it happened, that never happened in the prison service, and he stayed in his job and remains, I think, to this day, a very good and valued segregation unit officer. But he could no more work in a therapeutic environment than I could work in a seg unit. So it's a really good example of understanding what your values are. You might not always get those values renewed in the workplace. And if not, and if you feel trapped by that, and I do remember working with a young woman who was working in a software company, and she hated it. She just said, I'm absolutely miserable. I'm exhausted the whole time. I've got nothing in common. I've got no alignment. I thought this is what I wanted to do, and I really don't. But I've just bought a house, and I've got a mortgage, and I don't know what to do. And she felt completely trapped. So we talked about her core values and what they were. And we talked about ways that she might get those needs met outside of the workplace rather than investing everything in work. And until such a time as she was able to move on and find another job. And as far as I know, that's what she did. She certainly felt much better at the end, and she went with some plans about how she could do that. So to help with this, if it feels a bit overwhelming, because core values can be quite hard to access sometimes, you'll get this in the handouts. You could just have a think about what your values are, what really matters to you. And it's divided up here by Russ Harris into 4 useful domains. So work and education, health and personal growth, relationships and leisure. And think about how consistently do I act with my values in those areas? And are there any that could do with a bit of attention? Are there any I'm not paying attention to? Interestingly, I found recently that I've had a real urge to start doing something new, to learning something new, maybe get a qualification of some sort. So I clearly wasn't living by my core values in my work and education domain. So it's good to be able to pinpoint what's going on and think about what you can do about that. So, any other suggestions for your spiritual energy? Let's see, this is a hard one. I mean, because it's so very inherently personal, really. And sometimes it can mean a really big change. So I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't get that many contributions here. But oh, lovely, volunteering. Loads of research about the psychological benefits of volunteering. It's fantastic. Yeah, challenges for yourself. I would probably put taking regular time to reflect, if I could input something. Regular time to reflect on what's important and how I meet those needs. Praying, diary writing, charity work. Yeah. And yes, talking it through. Here's some personal disclosure. So I'm a supervisor too. I've been working in this field for 30 years. I think it's always good to have someone else to talk to, a disinterested fellow professional. And I was talking to her about, I need to discuss the dissonance I feel between the work I've got to do and my drive to do it. There's a bit of a mismatch, and I want to talk it through with her, because I know when she reflects it back, I'll probably get some light bulb moments. It'll be really helpful. Lovely. And any of you into philosophy, joining philosophy groups might be really interesting. The meaning of life, get rid of ego. What a good idea. Okay. Thank you. There's some really lovely things. And as I say, you'll be able to see them all at the end. I think my next slide, oh yeah, no, not what I thought it was, but this, obviously, the key to successful energy management is balancing expenditure and recovery in all 4 domains. And what you can, if you feel like it, this is a handout, you can have a think about those 4 domains of energy. And we've probably got other areas of our life except work and home. Maybe we've got a social life as well, but we'll just use those 2 and think about not just what saps your energy, but what really energizes you in those domains, and what takes your energy away, and what might help energize you. And you don't have to like fill every box here, but just maybe have a think. If there's a particular domain that's low, what am I going to do about that? How am I going to address that particular tank and get it filled? And we'll have a look at that in a second. Oh, right now, in fact. So let's have a think. Go back to the beginning and think about your emptiest tank, and think about the immediate steps that you might take to refuel that tank. What are you going to do when you get off this webinar? Take time off work. Good plan. When you get off this webinar, what are you going to do that will help redress maybe some of the balance? So I definitely will take 10 minutes and do nothing, probably go and sit outside in the fresh air. I might even do a Sudoku, or whatever they are actually called, if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Yeah, do you know, even someone just mentions breathing, it's a bit like yawning. It makes me want to take a really decent breath. Yeah. I'm just going to look away from my screen again for 20 seconds, which is really nice because my eyes are tired. Cycle home, nice. Oh yeah, that's a nice immediate thing, is to put things away that distract you. That's a really good plan, because it's so our attention gets grabbed by them, don't they? We're like magpies going for shiny things. It's like if there's something else that is easier, more interesting to do than the thing we should actually be doing. Yeah, try and get some more sleep. Yeah, definitely have a look at Narina's books. They're really, really good. Eat something, good plan. Cold shower, no thanks. Okay, some lovely things. Brilliant. Make sure you do them. Make a commitment to yourself to do that, to renew your energy. I came across this. I don't know if any of you have come across Liz Foslin's work on LinkedIn particularly, but she's also written a couple of books that are absolutely fabulous. I love her graphics. I think this, for me, summarizes energy management, about what we think makes us productive versus what does, and it just brings together everything that I've talked to you about for the last 45 minutes. Let me just put this together in a quick case study so you can see it in action, and then I'm going to shush so that if there are any questions. A number of years ago, about 12 years ago, I was asked to go and work with a small team who were in a high security prison, whose job it was to monitor high risk offenders. A very challenging job, reading files with nasty offence accounts and victim statements and witness statements, listening to phone calls that offenders were making to their family, which were often quite abusive. It's a men's prison, so partners generally were women, but with parents, wives, children crying and upset in the background. It was a really emotionally laden and demanding work, undertaken in a little bunker at the bottom of the prison with very little natural daylight. And the area manager was really worried about the team. He said, I've been down there, there are 4 of them, they're exhausted, they look grey, they look tired, I'm scared we're going to lose them, they're good at what they do. Please, Joe, my job was wellbeing advisor at the time, go and see if you can do something. So the first thing we actually did was establish what was going well, because we often ignore that when things are going badly. So I do the same for you. What are the rewards of what you're doing and how you're living your life, what job you're in, your family circumstances? What are the rewards of those things? Because that can really help. And they said things like, you know, we're protecting the public, we're keeping the prison safe, we're preventing escapes. It's a privileged job. We get to know things that other people aren't allowed to know. You know, they loved their work. But what they were doing was getting in at 8 in the morning, not leaving till 6 at night, sat all day with headphones on their ears, not even stopping for lunch, listening to phone calls, interrogating files, And they've been doing it for months, maybe even longer, and they were exhausted. So we used energy management as a plan. We introduced breaks every 90 minutes, which they had to take, and they had to hold each other to account. At the end of the day, they did a quick formal debrief about, what am I leaving here at work? What do I not want to take home today? Is there anything happened, anything kicked me emotionally that I want to leave at work? We made sure they rotated around tasks, so they weren't doing the same thing all day, not sat listening to calls or interrogating files. And we also did a little bit of training around what to expect when you're doing emotionally challenging work. 6 months later, we had a psychologically and physically really healthy group. They'd taken up running, 2 of them had taken up running, one of them started going to the gym at lunchtime. They'd started their own little fundraising thing. They were still doing the debriefs. They were taking regular breaks. And last year, some 12 years after we introduced this, a member of that team found me at an event and she said, I'm a senior manager now, Jo, but I will never forget energy management and how that helped us survive and how I use that now with my team, and they're thriving. So we know it works. This is the book if you want to know more. Absolutely, it's written in 2006, maybe even 2003, I can't remember. So it's quite old. They've written more stuff since, but very, very powerful stuff. And that leaves us not very long, I'm so sorry, for questions if there are any. So I'm just wondering, I'm hoping Mandy's there because she knows what she's doing. If I exit the slides, shall I exit the slides, Mandy?
You can leave that on, it's fine. Yeah, we have got quite a few questions come through. We've got a couple of minutes left, so we're trying to go through as many as possible. What was that book title again? Someone's just asked. Nice, quick, easy one.
On Form, The Power of Full Engagement.
Great. Changing embedded habits is really hard. Any advice on how to make new habits stick?
Yeah, it is really hard and I struggle with it myself, but I would say literally one step at a time. Don't think about this is my habit now and this is the habit I want in the future. Think about how am I going to implement my new habit in the next hour. So if my new habit is to not eat chocolate all day, I've just got to go an hour without eating chocolate. If my new habit is to take a break every hour and a half, then don't think about I've got to do that forever and ever. Just think, right, today I'm going to take a break in an hour and a half. So literally just one step at a time. Make it small and achievable.
Brilliant. How would you recommend identifying what your core stroke spiritual values are?
Oh, that's such a big, deep question. I would find a coach actually, or a therapist, or somebody just to have a couple of sessions with to really examine it. The work I really love is by a psychologist called George Kelly, who wrote Personal Construct Psychology. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head of any of his books. A Psychology for Living, I think, is one of them that is good to read. But it just helps you understand what drives and motivates you. But I personally, not for therapy, but just to work with a psychologically informed coach or therapist who can help ask the right questions and help you explore that. And you can ask people who know you as well, how they see you. That's always helpful.
Yeah, definitely. How do you get the journal, the writing template, written disclosure that you mentioned?
Right, if you email jo@petros.org.uk, just put written disclosure in the subject line and I will send it to you by return, and it's got a reference on there as well. You don't have to say anything else, just put written disclosure and I'll send it to you. Although if you want to chat, please do, that's always lovely.
How do you find things that re-energize you emotionally?
I think partly because of my training, I'm very, very aware of my emotional state at any given time. And so I think it's acknowledging where that feeling comes from and then finding things that kind of contrast with it. So if I'm feeling sad, for example, maybe something's happened, a completely legitimate reason for feeling sad, I might try and just read a book or watch a film or talk to a friend who I know is going to change that emotion for me or help me manage it while I've got it. But it's difficult to renew your emotional energy. I think it is about what's nourishing for you. It's very personal. So I've got a hobby which is all-consuming, which I find really helpful, but everyone's very different. So think about what your emotional needs are, and I would just spend some time doing a bit of reflection on that and how you might get those met.
And I think we've got time for just one more. Is napping okay?
I think so. I love napping, but again, the experts would say don't nap for longer than about 20 minutes, because if you get into the deep sleep cycle, you can really muck up your evening sleep. But a 20-minute power nap, probably long enough, is enough just to get that renewal. So yes, I'd say go for it.
So of your 8 hours sleep, someone's asking how many hours should be deep sleep?
A minimum of about 15%, so it's about an hour and a half. But don't get hung up on it. That's the other thing. You see, if you monitor your sleep, and then you realise you haven't had enough, you know what your mind says? Oh my God, you're going to be really tired because you haven't had enough deep sleep. So it's probably best just to assess how you feel in the morning. As I say, the experts will say don't monitor your sleep. It's not a good plan.
Brilliant, thank you. God, I think we could have went on forever. Still lots of questions come through. Everyone saying how great it's been, really interesting and insightful, and how much they've enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved doing it, actually. It's been really, I feel very energised, but I am going to go and take a break.
Oh, thank you, Jo, and thanks for everybody attending. I am going to close the webinar now, but just before I do, I want to let you know that there's going to be an evaluation form that will pop up. If you could just take the 20 seconds to fill it out, we'd be really grateful for your feedback. Okay, that's all from me. Thanks, Jo. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.